2 days before the retreat began.
Well, yes, well, okay. Well, remember, revenge will be sweet and out of proportion.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, anyway, it's really lovely to come in here. And while you guys have all been having a conversation on screen, we've been having a conversation around the screen, just saying hello to each other. And there's actually 6 of us in the shrine room. Yes. And so we've been just tuning in with each other, which has been very nice. But it's really been gorgeous listening to you all having this conversation, really lovely. And I was going to say something, what was I going to say? And I love that line, that last moment, Ratnaguna, where you said you went and saw somebody in London. It was like a disciple of the Buddha saying, I met a man who said, there isn't just one cause of suffering. And he felt the whole of the Dharma life unfold from that moment or something. Anyway, great. So welcome back, everybody. So today I'm going to do a presentation. But I'll just quickly tell you what we're going to do this morning and this afternoon. And then I'll launch in a little bit. So this morning, I'm going to be doing a presentation on the self-contained aspect of this, the title of this retreat. So that's where we're going to. And the whole day will be based more around that kind of material, that flavor. And this afternoon, I think we're hearing a presentation from Ratnaguna. Is that correct? Have we got that presentation? I haven't listened to it myself, so I don't know if it sets us up for reflection or whether I'll need to do that. But anyway, me and Ratnaguna will be in contact later at some point. And so I'm hoping this will become the beginning of a bit more of a reflective retreat, as well as just a very discursive, conversational retreat as well. And this morning, I'm going to be doing a presentation on this self-contained aspect of individuality. And then at the end of that, we're going to have a Dharma appeal. And every morning, we'll have a Dharma appeal at the start of the tea break or at the start of the break. And today, Dharma Mai is going to do that for me. I thought it might be a bit much for me to go straight from presenting the Dharma straight into giving a Dharma appeal, although they do move very sort of easily between 1 and 2. And then we'll go back into groups. And if you get fed up with hearing Dharma appeals throughout the week, you can just think to yourself, I wish this would stop. And then you could think, what is it that I really want to stop? And just introspect at that moment. What is the thing that you're finding difficult to be with? Yeah. And before all of that, I want us to hear a sort of 1-minute clip from an interview I did with Bhante on his poem, The Bodhisattva's Reply. And I should just say, in a minute, you can start recording or whatever. Is it in recording on? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Yeah, so I was doing these recordings with Bhante a year or so before he died. And I was just going into his room and just talking to him about a particular poem, some of which he'd chosen himself and some of which I had chosen, and rehearsing an interview with him, and then a few days later doing the actual interview. And this is his final thoughts on that particular poem. So we'll just hear that, okay? Let's just make sure we can get it.
Well, I thought a little about Ambedkar. When our Indian Buddhist friends like to think of him as a bodhisattva. And certainly there's something in the bodhisattva's reply that could be applied to him. Because the bodhisattva says that he will give them his strength. And this is what Ambedkar did, yes. Because he was the man who had the vision. Perhaps they never would have, perhaps none of them would have found their way to the Dharma without Ambedkar, without his example, without his exhortation, without his understanding of the situation. Yeah. So that does show, among other things, the importance of the individual. One person, one man or one woman can do so much. Of course, not everybody is as gifted as Ambedkar was, but nonetheless, one person can do quite a lot, can influence quite a lot of other people. So that was just an additional thought that I had.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. A very frail old man at that point, although still very much alive in his mind. And when I was interviewing him throughout all those interviews, he had all the, he had poetry at his fingertips. He had access to a lot of information that he'd gathered throughout his life. And of course, he didn't have any notes in front of him. He was talking completely sort of ad lib, as it were. But very measured and thoughtful, and often enjoying any kind of unusual questions. I think he knew some of the questions I was going to ask him because I'd already told him, but I would say, I've got a few other questions, Bhante, do you want to know what they are? And he'd say, no, Saddhanandi, no, leave that as a surprise. And he loved all that. He loved that being drawn out, something being drawn out of him. Anyway, he was talking about Ambedkar and the effect that Ambedkar had on a lot of Indians and, well, in the world. Actually, he's a very major figure in the world. And, well, just drawing out how effective and one person can be in this world, and maybe just each one of us taking a sense of that we can all have an effect in the world in very small ways. There's this very beautiful paragraph at the end of Middlemarch by, is it George Eliot? Thank you. And she talks about the heroine, and she says the heroine had made a slight difference in all her interactions. And the world consists of many people just doing benefit in very small, unnoticeable ways, but gradually building up, if you like, a life of change and a life of effect. Yeah, so, okay, so in my presentation, I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and at 5 o'clock I was thinking, come on, Saddhanandi, what are you going to do with this presentation this morning? And I knew roughly the sort of areas I wanted to cover, but we're about 2 stages away from a polished talk. So it'll be good enough for what we all need in the groups, but it isn't exactly how I wished it to be. So many years ago, probably in the late 90s, I was at Vajrakuta, possibly on a retreat led by Ratnaguna, on a study leaders retreat. And it was possibly in the same year that I was going to lead a retreat on individuality at Haraloka. And I was very interested in that theme. And in their library, they had a book by a scholar in Lancashire University called Peter Harvey. And his book was called The Selfless Mind. And I was very, very interested in this topic. And I got very interested in it because it seemed to chime with Bhante's description of the individual. And I was always looking for ways of bridging what I was learning in Triratna and what was the tradition, or what I was learning in Triratna and what other people, other Buddhists sort of thought. Yeah. I mean, just on an offside, I could just say, for instance, the idea that the bodhicitta arises in a group of people rather than so much the individual. I also know that Joanna Macy held the same view, interestingly enough. So I was always trying to sort of make those connections. And I got very, very excited about this book. And this is a little paragraph from him, from Peter Harvey. This is the path by which those with great selves have fared. And he's quoting the Ita Vitika. Having seen that Nibbana shares most, if not all, of the characteristics of the supposed metaphysical self, it will now be shown that the early suttas see an enlightened person as one whose empirical self is highly developed. Thus, while self is seen as a baseless concept, this does not preclude the development of a strong empirical self. Indeed, the most developed self is one which is precisely known as selfless and I-less. Thus, paradoxically, the way to attain the self-like Nibbana and to develop a fully mature empirical self is, at least in part, to know everything as selfless. So what he's trying to say is the nature of a highly developed person is not only this quality of selflessness, to have seen through all the wrong views of self, but also that with that would become very strongly developed characteristics. In other words, the characteristics of an individual, as we're thinking of it now. So his book's very sort of scholarly, and I can't unpack it all. And even that little paragraph that I've just read out probably could do with half an hour or so of discussion and unpacking it. But really all I'm trying to communicate right now is the inspiration I felt to find some sort of explanation of this teaching of individuality within another person's work. Yeah. So he then conjures up these two aspects. This is Peter Harvey. He conjures up these two aspects, self-contained and boundaryless, or self-contained and without boundaries. And we're going to go into the self-containedness today, and tomorrow we'll go into the boundarylessness, or the no boundaries aspect of self. And he has these very neat little lines like, if we are an island unto ourselves, then eventually there is nothing on the island. And when there's nothing on the island, then the island has lost its parameters. So this is just highly metaphorical language, but it appealed to me, and I'm just passing it on to you. So here's another quote from Peter Harvey. The chitta of one on the Buddhist path, then, should not be at the mercy of outside stimuli, nor of its own moods, etc., but should be an island of calm, imbued with self-control and self-contained. It should no longer be scattered and diffused, but should be more integrated and consistently directed towards one goal, Nibbana. So he's using this image again of the island, an island of calm, which we heard in particularly in the sutras that Saddhanandi was quoting yesterday. It should be an island of calm, imbued with self-control and self-contained, no longer scattered and diffused, but should be more integrated and consistently directed towards one goal. So in other words, we're on this very basic teaching of satipatthana, of mindfulness. And the mindfulness of breathing is totally equipped to direct the mind in the direction of no longer scattered and diffused. And we're going to look at that a little bit later today. So we know the quote and of the island, and anyone who went to Parinirvana, attended Parinirvana Day festivals a few days ago will have probably heard it afresh. Yeah. Let's read it. Therefore, Ananda, be islands unto yourselves, refuges unto yourselves, seeking no external refuge, with the Dharma as your island, the Dharma as your refuge, seeking no other refuge. And how, Ananda, is a bhikkhu an island unto himself, a refuge unto himself, seeking no external refuge? with the Dharma as his island, the Dharma as his refuge, seeking no other refuge. When he dwells, contemplating the body in the body, earnestly, clearly comprehending and mindful, after having overcome desire and sorrow in regard to the world. When he dwells, contemplating feelings in feelings, the mind in the mind, and mental objects in mental objects, earnestly, clearly comprehending and mindfully, after having overcome desire and sorrow in regard to the world, then truly he is an island unto himself, a refuge unto himself, seeking no external refuge, having the Dharma as his island, the Dharma as his refuge, seeking no other refuge. Those bhikkhus of mine, Ananda, who now or after I am gone, abide as an island unto themselves, as a refuge unto themselves, seeking no other refuge, having the Dharma as their island and refuge, seeking no other refuge. It is they who will become the highest if they have the desire to learn. So it's turning all of us towards this self-awareness, this mindfulness, this quality of mindfulness, which, as Ratnaguna quite rightly said yesterday, is the seed of individuality. So I think I just sort of want to entreat you all to sort of take mindfulness very, very seriously and practice it as deeply as you can. Yeah, I think we get used to kind of a very low level understanding or sense of what mindfulness really adds up to. And I think we could take our questioning further, our introspection further. I remember in Glasgow, when I was living in Glasgow, I went and heard a talk at the Buddhist Centre, but I couldn't stay there because it all just felt like too much input, and there was probably something going on for me. I didn't know what was going on. And I walked home, which was about a 40-minute walk in the evening. And then I got to my own little bed sit. And during this time, I was living on my own. I just had 18 months living on my own in between communities. And I lay on my bed and I thought, oh, it's just all too much. It's just all too much. So that is a quality of mindfulness. I knew something was difficult for me and it was all too much. And then I just asked this very simple question: what is too much? And then I was in a space, I was in enough of a space to actually have an answer at my fingertips, which was, I am too much. It's me that's too much. There's something in me that's too much. And what unfolded within the next 2 or 3 minutes was my ugly sisters. So I discovered I was a Cinderella with 2 ugly sisters. So I've got the ugly sister of a sort of Dolly Parton, flamboyant, extrovert, craving. And what she does is she grabs hold of all my pleasant experiences and shores herself up with them. And then I've got another ugly sister who's like a kind of prim primary school teacher, keeping everything under control, highly critical, although I never had teachers like this, I must admit, and highly critical, who takes all my experience that is wrong or unpleasant or is open to criticism, and then shores herself up in another way, which is saying, this is who you are, this is who you really are, and undermines me. And these 2 ugly sisters get hold of my experience over and over again. So I hardly know what my experience is, but between them, there is somebody else. And from then on, my awareness was building on that other character. It's just using it all metaphorical language again. But I'm just trying to illustrate how mindfulness or awareness of self isn't just being able to write down, I feel this. You've got to go much further. I mean, that's why I was trying to draw out yesterday the securities that are underlying so many of our thoughts and feelings, and the way that we're perpetuating and investing in the island of self. Let's use that metaphor at the moment, rather than the island of Dharma as a refuge. So then we have another teaching that's sort of connected to the quality of mindfulness, and this is viveka. And Ratnaguna mentioned this yesterday. So viveka is this word meaning, well, it's self-contained, solitude, withdrawal, all those things. And he also mentioned aloneness and also being alone, feeling lonely even. So there's different aspects to viveka, and I'm not going to go into them all. I'll just say that viveka is sometimes described in 3 ways, or has 3 different aspects to it. So there's kaya veka, which means physical withdrawal, physical solitude, sort of withdrawing from, in a way it's protecting your senses from input. And this is certainly an area that we could all probably focus on. I've got interestingly, I've got a friend who really wants to go on solitary retreat at the moment. They really want to go somewhere where they can withdraw from all the input that they've got in their lives at the moment. But they can't, because no places are available for solitary retreats right now. And also it's illegal for that person to travel that kind of distance to do that, to go there, because of the lockdown that we've got in the UK. So they're trying to work out for themselves, how can I be on solitary and in my normal life? And they began to realize that there were many times in the day when they were more withdrawn from activity. Sometimes it's when they were driving to the shops and they were on their own, for instance. Sometimes it was when they went for a walk. And sometimes it was maybe in between, I don't know, doing a bit of a hobby and going to bed. And they thought, why don't I use this time as a solitary retreat? And my whole day can be interspersed with a 20-minute solitary. Why not just do that? And they began to do that. And the thirst for just being on solitary retreat or being withdrawn in a very kind of extreme way dispersed. Yeah. So that is one aspect of viveka. Another aspect is chitta viveka, mental withdrawal. So this is when we are mentally withdrawing from, well, again, probably, what are we doing with our minds? You know, what are we doing? We might not be traveling, but what are the fantasies? Or what are the mental states that we're indulging with? And are we using a kind of discernment or well, let's just say discernment of appetite with our own mind states? Yeah. In what way do we need to withdraw from certain mental events? I've got 1 or 2 friends who get, well, we all get like this actually. I can think of myself now. We get obsessed about certain things, don't we? And sometimes I say to myself and others, let's just have a curfew on that thought. How about we come back to it in 24 hours? And it's like a kind of, you put something aside, yeah? Because when you're obsessing about something, it's very hard to stop that mental proliferation. But if you know in your mind, okay, I'm going to come back to it, I'll just rest the mind, then it allows you to put something down. And when you come back to it, you won't come back to it with quite the same obsessiveness. It won't be quite the same compulsiveness as when you originally took hold of it. In Know Your Mind, Bhante has this fantastic phrase. He says, the nature of samsara is compulsion. So notice where compulsion arises in the mind, and then see what it feels like to withdraw from that. Or certainly notice compulsion and decide what you're going to do then. Yeah. And then upadi viveka. So this is withdrawal from the roots of suffering. And this can be described in many different ways. I mean, our attachment to skandhas or our attachment to kleshas, attachment to how samsara, how existence is created. Yes. Let me just see if I can find in my notes what I thought. I mean, it's got here listed in one bit from the internet. It says the grasping onto things, the grasping onto sense pleasures, onto views, onto rites and rituals, and onto self. And you can choose which sort of avenue you want to go down to where you want to release the grasping. But I quite liked those, just looking at where my security is based on greed, hatred, or delusion. Like where is security based on me maintaining a certain view of myself and then drilling down to that. Maybe that's something we can unpack a bit more in the groups. I think, can I go into this a bit more in a bit better way? Okay, let me just try and do something. Okay, so there was one day when I was walking from the women's community to the main kitchen at Adhisthana, and I thought maybe I'll go and do some washing up. And then the thought occurred to me, now the community are often saying to me, Saddhanandi, you do not need to do as much washing up as you do. And this is because they see that there is a compulsion behind it. And also there were other things that they want me in my role as chair to be doing. And sometimes I'm doing the washing up. And that can be good. It can be just very restful for me. And sometimes it's a distraction. So I was walking up to the dining room thinking, maybe I can do some washing up. And then I thought, okay, Saddhanandi, let's just explore what is really going on. And I won't take you through the next few minutes because I can't quite remember it. And it's probably only interesting to me. But what I came out with was, I have a view that I want to be someone who contributes. And my self-view is very caught up in how I contribute. And washing up is a way that I participate in contributing to a certain team effort. And I've got an insecurity around letting go of that a bit. So I'm not doing it justice because it's all very kind of me just thinking in the moment. But basically what I'm trying to say is, even on that level, we can be shoring up some attachment to who we really want to be or who we're trying to be in the world. Yeah. Okay, so the Viveka aspect is describing a process of letting go, of renunciation. And there's this lovely quote, I think it is from Andrew Cohen, where he says, renunciation is really listening to the call of the heart, which is a very different take on renunciation. And really what he's saying is, you're saying no because you're really trying to say yes to something else. And what we're really trying to say yes to is a kind of mindfulness of purpose, or what we're really trying to do with our lives. Naomi Shihab Nye writes a poem called The Art of Disappearing, and what she's writing about there is she's saying, as a poet, I'm saying yes to the art of poetry, and that requires me to say no to an awful lot of other things. So what are we really trying to say yes to? That's the only reason why we practice renunciation. So one of the qualities that Bhante draws out in terms of individuality is fidelity. And he lists fidelity in terms of fidelity to oneself, fidelity to one's ideals, and fidelity to the other people. And I just want to just look at a little bit at the first two, fidelity to oneself and to ideals. In other words, what are we trying to say yes to? We're trying to say yes to something, some self-development in us, some process in us that requires us to be on the ball. And so we're trying to embody a much deeper, more sort of visionary, more ethical sense of self, let's say. And we're also trying to say, in a relation to that and very strongly connected, is we're trying to say yes to our ideals. So Bhante says, what does it mean to be true to oneself, to be faithful to oneself? It means consistently acting, speaking, and thinking in accordance with what is best, what is highest in oneself, or in accordance with one's own best or highest interests. It involves seeing oneself, as it were, objectively, though not in any sort of cold-blooded fashion. It consists in being consistently faithful to one's own interests in the highest and fullest sense. This is fidelity to oneself. It takes us quite a long time, I think, to really understand who we really are and what it means to be faithful to oneself. And, you know, in one of the conversations I had with Ratnaguna before this retreat started, in one of our meetings online, he said something to me that was a bit more personal about our relationship, our friendship, and then I battered it back with a slightly offhand comment, which I then had to apologize for in our next conversation. And in that respect, I wasn't honoring him and what he'd said to me. And I wasn't honoring me at my best. And when we consistently don't honor ourselves at our best, eventually we're living a very shallow life, very separated from us. Yeah. In a way, confession, let's use that because I was also using this example as a confession. This confession is to realign ourselves with who we truly are. It's not for any other reason. We're just realigning our center of gravity. We're kind of getting back to the purity of who we really are and back to our values. Okay then, fidelity to ideals. This is the next aspect that Bhante draws out. So this is interesting. Bhante says, fidelity to ideals does not mean necessarily fidelity to ideas. So this is definitely a question for the group. What is the difference between ideals and ideas? Bhante then goes on to talk about what an ideal is. An ideal may be defined as a regulative model for human existence. This model is not imposed upon human existence from without. It's derived from human existence itself. An ideal brings the basic trend, or if you like, the true nature of that existence more clearly into awareness, more clearly into consciousness. And thus it intensifies that trend, that basic trend. So in some ways he's saying an ideal is a universal ideal. And it arises from within human existence itself. It's not just coming in from somebody else. And we have to discover that from ourselves. Other people might tell you what their ideal is, and it might be a universal ideal, but it won't be necessarily your ideal. Your ideal will be drawn out of your experience of yourself. And what you can do is you can see in your life, what are you saying yes to? Yeah, what are you saying yes to? What moves you? Where do you have a heart response or a faith response? And often that will indicate where your ideals are showing up in the world. Bhante has quite a strong sense of ideals having to arise out of human existence itself. They're not artificial ideals. And if you want to go to the kind of his central sort of teaching on that, you go to this little lecture called the ideal of human enlightenment, where he talks about the ideal of human enlightenment arising out of human existence itself. It's not impinged from outside. Therefore, it's not an artificial ideal. It's a natural one. So he's describing a life based on values. Now, I'm just looking at where I want to go now. Yeah, it sometimes can be like a cornerstone. When you've worked out some of what your values are, it's like you've got a cornerstone for your life. You've got a reference point. In a way, it's what our Going for Refuge is going to be based on. Maybe I'll just quote you something from, it's a quote from Middleton Murray, which I really love. It's Middleton Murray being an essay writer and poet, I think from the previous centuries, maybe 18th century or 19th, I can't remember which one. How? 19th century, thank you. And Bhante quotes him at the front of his book, The History of My Going for Refuge. And I almost know this quote off by heart because I love it so much, so I'll just read it to you. To discover that within myself which I must obey, to gain some awareness of the law which operates in the organic whole of the internal world, to feel this internal world as an organic whole, working out its whole destiny according to some secret vital principle, to know which acts and utterances are a liberation from obstacles and an accession of strength, to acknowledge secret loyalties which one cannot deny without impoverishment and starvation. This is to possess one's soul indeed, and it is not easy either to do or to explain. So Bhante quotes that at the beginning of his History of My Going for Refuge. And this is the line that I love. I love all of them actually, but this particularly always stands out. To acknowledge secret loyalties which one cannot deny without impoverishment and starvation. So this is where our fidelity to our values and to ourself is based on. And then Bhante quite rightly says, of course, there are obstacles to faithfulness. There's obstacles to fidelity. And the quick answer is distraction, basically. Distraction and attachment. And he uses he talks, let's think how to go. Yeah, let's just jump there. So it says the near enemy of fidelity is attachment. So it's called a near enemy, or it is a near enemy because it looks quite similar to fidelity. You know, for instance, if you're very, very attached to a view, if you're very, very attached to an idea, then you can look as if you're being faithful, or you've got a fidelity to an ideal. So here's a question for the group. What's the difference between attachment to ideals and fidelity to ideals? I think being on the receiving end of a communication where someone is attached to an ideal, rather than when someone has fidelity to an ideal, is a very different conversation. What does that look like? What does it look like inside yourself? You know, when you're attached to something and when you're faithful to it. What is showing up and what isn't showing up in either case? When we're, Bhante says, when we're attached to something, we have very little self-consciousness, very little self-awareness, and therefore no real individuality. Going back to the island metaphor, you could say you're too busy trying to build something on that island right there, right then. And then the far enemy of fidelity is distraction. So all of us know about distraction, don't we? Let me see, what do I want to do? Bhante says, Distraction is something that forces itself on our attention when we do not really want to pay attention to it. So I'm going to go into that in a minute, but I'll just say that just to finish off a little bit around fidelity. Another obstacle to fidelity is isolation, or if you like, it's more of a test. Yeah, maybe that's the best way. A test of fidelity is isolation. And we can have isolation in terms of people, like maintaining fidelity to people when we're not in contact with them is much harder. Well, this is very interesting in terms of my example of myself with Ratnaguna. When I'm not in touch with myself, I'm not faithful to myself. That's quite interesting. I hadn't thought of that. When we're not in touch with a good friend, we're not necessarily faithful to that friend in whatever way that means. Or when we're not in touch with a person suffering, maybe we're not faithful to how we talk about it to other people. Or when we're not in touch with or in the presence of a lover, we're not faithful to them in different ways. So isolation. But isolation, it's very hard, for instance, for us to be faithful to ideals when we're having to follow those ideals in isolation. When other people around us, maybe friends or family, don't agree with those ideals. As Bhante says in his lecture on fidelity, he says, maybe some people think they're wrong, or maybe they look out of date, or they don't actually look very fun. They don't look like fun. So then suddenly you find yourself in a desert holding a certain value. And other people around you, your peer groups, or college members, or people you work with, don't hold the same ideals. And then it's very, very difficult to maintain connection with them. Bhante says human beings will do almost anything to avoid that kind of isolation. In other words, we'll mostly compromise, we'll often compromise. When I was a little girl, I used to have a slight kind of nightmare. I wasn't asleep when I was having this nightmare, but it was something I worried about, which was that I'd grow up and have to and find myself in a situation, a kind of heroic situation where I'd have to not give up under certain extreme conditions like torture or something like that, have to hold to my ideals under torture or very sort of extreme conditions. And I don't know why this was occurring to me. I don't know if it's left over from a past life or whether it's just that I also knew my own weakness of character and my own kind of emotionality. But it was certainly something I worried about. Maybe it was also that I knew I did sort of have ideals or something, or I was reading children's books that were a bit idealistic, I don't know. But I thought somewhere along the line, I'm going to lose my, what would be the word? I'd compromise, basically. I would compromise. And this was a worry to me at the age of 9. Yeah. And the rest is history, I'm afraid. So fidelity is a description of individuality because it gives us continuity of purpose. And with continuity of purpose, we have self-development. And with self-development, we have individuality. So I just want to make one last point and just go into I just want to have a quick look at distraction because it's such a big part of our lives usually. And you can draw very good material out of Subhuti's book, Mind in Harmony, where he goes into distraction as an affliction against equanimity. So I'll just quote from him. Distraction is a sort of wavering between a range of different objects, the mind hopping or drifting from one thing to another, never fully attending to anything in particular. It is typical of a mind that has not developed the intensifiers to any degree. Some emotional engagement does connect us to an object, but there is insufficient resolve or mindfulness to hold it steady. let alone absorption or penetration to see into it at all deeply. The process of intensification beyond that initial emotional engagement repeatedly breaks down, allowing the mind to flit chaotically across a wide range of objects, according to association or what immediately calls for our attention. And maybe the most important thing he's trying to say is, distraction is a force in the mind. Let me just put this properly. Distraction is an active process in the mind. It is a mechanism for dispersing attention, even a sort of will to distraction. Distraction is not merely something that happens to us. It is something we do. We seek it out as a strategy for avoiding an uncomfortable confrontation with the way things are. So maybe it's enough just to think of distraction as being an active aspect of the mind. And when you notice yourself getting distracted by different things on the internet, your associative mind just hopping through various things on the TV or in conversation, or there's a certain thing that you want to reflect on and you can't pursue that line of thought because other things keep coming in. Just think to yourself, this is an active aspect of my mind. It's not just something that's happening to me, okay? And see if that makes a difference. Becoming aware of what the nature of the mind is in terms of distraction. And then become aware what was happening in the period just before that you got distracted. Maybe that indicates why the need for distraction is happening. An uncomfortable, unpleasant experience of boredom, of worry, of anxiety about who one is, a fear of one's own existential insecurity. Who knows what's arising in the moment before? Okay, I think that is it for you. So me and Ratnaguna, thank you. Me and Ratnaguna are doing a kind of double act here, which is that he said all through the talk, he would just make note of any questions. So I'm just sort of going to quickly go back to Ratnaguna to see if you did write any questions down. And some of us, maybe somebody in my group write it down as well, because I can't write it down. Ratnaguna, any questions?
Yeah.
Oh.
I did. In fact, I made a mistake earlier. I wrote a question down and I thought I'll send that out at the end of the talk. And then I pressed the return button because I wanted to put the next question on the next line, and it went out to everybody. And
that's fine.
Then I had to write another message to everyone to say, ignore that for now, because I didn't want people to be distracted from what you were saying. And it made me think that actually one of my ugly sisters or brother is chaos. That I try to be very orderly, but I find myself sometimes causing chaos. I don't know why that happens. Anyway, so that one's up there already. And that question is, what do you think the Buddha meant when he said we should be islands unto ourselves? And how does that square with the idea of interconnectedness? And then two more questions. That one's out on the chat box already, but I'll send this other one in a minute. The two more questions in a moment. Renunciation is the call of the heart, which I think you said was Andrew
Cohen.
Hmm?
Cohen, I think it's Andrew Cohen.
Yeah. So that quote, what is it that you need to renounce in order to find or experience what you really want? Or you could say what you really need. You don't need to write these down because they'll be in the chat box in a moment. And finally, third question, what does fidelity to yourself mean to you? What ways do you tend to be unfaithful to yourself? So I'll just press the return button. Oh, didn't work this time. How does that work? Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So you got three questions from me, one higher up in the chat box and two here, the last two on the chat box. Did you come up with any, Saddhanandi?
I think I said them as I went through the talk, and I hear Patrick said he's put them into chat already, or put them somewhere. He's
Okay.
got them somewhere. Oh, he's just pressing the button. Have they come up in chat? I haven't got access to a chat.
Yeah, that's come up from tech support.
Good.
Yeah, it's a really long question. Oh no, they put it with my other ones as well. Yeah, that's great. They'll do something with it. The groups will do something with all that, I'm sure.
Good. Yeah. One of them, I think, was, what's the difference between being faithful to one's ideals and an idea? That's quite interesting. And maybe that's enough. There's plenty, isn't there? I'm sure people have written things down as well.
The other one was the difference between attachment and fidelity.
Okay, thank you. Good. Okay, so Patrick's saying the other one was how different is it to be, what's the difference between attachment to one's ideals and fidelity to one's ideals?
There's another question here from Paul. Did you read 1984 too young? The question to you.
Interestingly enough, Paul, I did a whole thesis, an arts thesis on 1984 when I was at art school. It was possibly too young, but I was at art school by then. Okie doke. So maybe I'm going to hand over to Jamamai, if that's all right, and we'll just do a quick down appeal. Great. And then during the tea break, am I muted? No. During the tea break, if you feel like making a donation, that's also possible, as well as making a cup of tea. And we'll come back together again in 20 minutes from now.
Okay, shall I go? Cool. Okay, great. So yeah, thank you, Saddhanandi. I know you said that wasn't like going to be a proper organized talk, but that was awesome. I've never written so many notes from a talk, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's just so wonderful being with you in some way. I'm sure that I'm not the only one of us who wishes that we were in there messing up all of the mats and cushions. But it's definitely, even though we're here in our boxes, I'm sure we're all having quite a rich experience anyway, although it's not the same as being with you. So if you feel like you are having a rich experience on this retreat and you would like to express your gratitude for that, then one of the ways that you can do that, as well as writing lovely messages in the chat box, is by donating some money to Adhisthana. So I know that some details, they're magically appearing in the chat box, and you might like to do that if you're feeling moved. Sometimes I find that I can have a generous impulse and then I forget to act on it, and that can feel quite gross. So sometimes it's quite nice to do it in the moment. So there's going to be a wonderful opportunity where we're going to get a cup of tea where you can do that. I know that not everyone's in a position probably to do that, and of course don't then. So that's what Dana is. It's an act of generosity. So if you can't be generous, then I'm sure that, I don't live or work at Adhisthana, but I'm sure that you're very welcome to be here anyway. But if you can, then I'm sure that even the smallest amount that we can give will be gratefully received, especially in these uncertain times where I think that places, hospitality industry is getting a bit of a financial bashing. So I'm sure that any money will be gratefully received and used really, really well. And I was reflecting as well as being a wonderful way we can express our gratitude for this retreat. It's just a wonderful way of helping to protect Adhisthana, which is so precious, I'm sure, to a lot of us. It's such an important and beautiful place, myth, and it's a way that we can all help to ensure that it's there when things are back to normal, not just for us, but for generations and generations of Dharma-farers in the future. It's something that we can do to help protect what's most precious to us and express a fidelity to our ideals in that way. Other things that we can do, apparently, according to the tech team, which are very useful, is we can sign up to the newsletter, the Adhisthana newsletter. If you don't already get that, you can go onto the website, and it's down there at the bottom, I think, the link where you can sign up for the website. And also what we can do is we can tell all our friends how wonderful these retreats are and book onto more of them. So these are all things that we can do. Oh, and here is a link with a calendar of events. Wonderful. Okay, and that's all from me. So I guess we're going to break now. So what time are we restarting?
15 minutes, 15 minutes. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. Thanks, Dharma. See you in a minute. Thank you.